Welcome to the Caribbean Cricket Podcast, your one-stop shop for all things West Indies cricket. By the fans, for the fans.
Roach, and I listen to the Caribbean Cricket Podcast.
Indeed, you are people who listen to the Caribbean Cricket Podcast. My name is Machel St. Look at my hair. My name is Machel St. Patrick here at one half of the Caribbean Cricket Podcast, and welcome to another edition. Oh, look at the plastic bag. Oh, it's a madness to me. Welcome to another edition of the Caribbean Cricket Podcast, and here we are, man. Here's another episode. If you're listening on the audio platforms, thank you. Continue to subscribe, continue to follow. We're on all podcast platforms: Spotify, Apple, Google Podcasts, Samsung, wherever you listen notes, Podbean, all of those things. Amazon. You can find the Caribbean Cricket Podcast on all possible podcast platforms. But if you're watching this on YouTube, then you know the drill by now. Thank you to everyone who has helped us get to 4K YouTube subscribers. At the time of recording, we're on 4,021, so we're already moving past 4K. So you know how it is. You can see the kind of scroll at the bottom. We're now on the road to 5K. Long journey, but we'll get there. All with your support. Like, share, subscribe, pass this video on, pass this channel on to anybody who you think would like the content, like what we do, etc., etc. Thank you to all those who've engaged with our video, an episode that we dropped interviewing the West Indies cricket CEO, or Cricket West Indies CEO, Johnny Grave. Quite a lot was kind of spoken about there with regards to the year ahead for West Indies cricket in 2023. So if you haven't watched that yet, after you've watched this video, by all means go back and watch that episode as well, as it's quite instructive about key things in West Indies cricket. But in terms of this particular video, it's a quick one, people. It is a quick one. I just kind of wanted to address the fallout from today's women's under-19s match. So today, West Indies in there, they got off the West Indies women's under-19 team, kicked off their Super 6 part of the competition of the T20 under-19 T20 World Cup. Now, if you haven't been following the tournament, we played initially in the group stages. We beat Ireland, we beat Indonesia, and we got smashed by New Zealand. But that was all enough to make it through to the Super 6 stage. In the Super 6 stage, for those who don't understand how the rules work, effectively, whoever ends up in so there's two groups of 6. Whoever ends up in your group of 6, you can't play the team who ended up in the same position as you in their group. It's a bit long-winded. So I think it's Pakistan are in our group, and I think it's Pakistan. We can't play them because they came second in their group as well. So what you do is you play the team who came in your group who came first in their... Sorry, I'm trying to make this make sense. In your Super 6 group, you play 2 matches. You have to play the team who came third in their initial group. So that would have been Rwanda for us, and the team who played first. So everybody in the group plays the equivalent first place team and first place team. And for Rwanda, it would have been second place team. And the rules are you can't play the team that ended up in the same position as you in their initial group stage. I don't think I've explained that very well, but if you were able to follow along with that, well done. Because when I first read about the rules, it took me a while to try and understand what exactly they're talking about. So you don't just go into a group of 6 and play like the other 5 teams. You only play 2 matches, and effectively you play against teams who did not end in the same position as you. That's basically how the Super 6 stage works. If I've got that wrong, sorry, people. And if you're watching this on YouTube, by all means, correct me in the comments below. So anyways, the West Indies women's under-19 side has 2 games to play in the Super 6 stage. The top 2, obviously, in the Super 6 stage in our group goes through to the semi-finals. West Indies were always going to be up against it. And I don't think there was never any kind of expectation, certainly not from me, that they would ever be in contention to make it through to the semi-final. I should also point out that you bring across your points from the previous group stage into the Super Sixes. So New Zealand brought across 4 points because they beat us and they beat Ireland, who also qualified for the Super Sixes. We brought across 2 points because we beat Ireland, but we lost to New Zealand. I hope that makes sense for people. So you start with a set amount of points depending on who you beat from the teams who qualified. So Ireland, who are in our group, the only team they beat was Indonesia. So when they went into the Super Sixes, they went in with 0 points because they hadn't beaten any team within their initial group who had qualified for the Super Sixes. So we were up against Rwanda. And sorry, our 2 games in the Super Sixes are Rwanda and England. England obviously are one of the main favourites for the competition. Them and India, and Australia, obviously, are seen as like the big kind of favourites to win this tournament. India or England, I think, are considered to be the kind of key favourites to win this tournament. So we already knew going into this Super Six stage, well, we're going to lose to England. So really and truly, it was just about, can we beat Rwanda or not? And this is where I pause. Because to make the point I'm about to make, I think I have to say the following. And I hope people understand this analogy. It's kind of a long-winded way of making the point I want to make here. I'm going to use the European Cup analogy to explain this. Okay, so for those of you who are listening, we're talking about the European Cup, the major European championship to decide who are the champions of Europe in football. In 1978, 79, Nottingham Forest Football Club won the European Cup. In 1979-80, Nottingham Forest retained it. They won again consecutive years. In 1981-82, Aston Villa won the European Cup. In 1982-83, Hamburg from Germany won the European Cup. In 1985-86, Steaua Bucharest from Romania won the European Cup. In 1987-88, PSV Eindhoven from the Netherlands won the European Cup. In 1990-91, Red Star Belgrade, granted that was seen as a match-fixing final, but they won the European Cup from the former Yugoslavia. The reason why I make that point, and some of you will be like, Mash, what the hell are you talking about now? You're always on some next thing. The reason why I start with that point is this. A team is relevant to its era, right? In the 80s, when Steaua Bucharest won the European Cup, the men's football European Cup, they were a good team. If you beat Steaua Bucharest now in qualifying for the Champions League, that is expected because Steaua Bucharest, there's actually, I shouldn't even use Steaua Bucharest because there's actually complications about who the real Steaua Bucharest are now. But assuming the same entity of Steaua Bucharest existed like the previous Steaua Bucharest, nobody would consider that a major upset if they were beaten in a qualifying stage of the Champions League. Nottingham Forest, if they ever qualified for the Champions League in this modern era, people would be shocked. They are no longer considered a major club on the global football stage. Neither Aston Villa. Their history is significant. Nottingham Forest are a 2-time European Cup winning side from the 1970s, early 80s. Aston Villa are a former European Cup winning side. But neither of those 2 English Premier League sides are seen as globally significant in the modern day era in terms of being a top side. If you can understand that from a football perspective, why is it that both West Indian fans and to a wider extent, the general cricket population cannot understand that the West Indies name, whilst that has historical legacy and whilst that has historical importance in the context of us once being great, it isn't anything major to beat the West Indies now. Why are some of you finding this so hard to get through your head? And yes, you can talk about, but Mash, it's painful to see the fall from grace, Some of the headlines I saw after Rwanda beat West Indies by 4 wickets today, like ESPN ran one, Wisdom ran one, countless people on Twitter who, like, you kind of not paid for blue ticks, but like cricket kind of writers ran the headlines. Wow, major upset in under-19 Cricket World Cup. Rwanda beat West Indies. Wow, Real eye-opening result in the Under-19 World Cup. Rwanda beat West Indies. On face value, I get it. If we're just going to take it at face value, I totally get it. But this is how I know people don't study anything anymore. Because why are you talking about West Indies as if we're some big side? Why are you talking about us and particularly in the under-19 women's context, what on earth are you talking about? Don't get me wrong. Is it a shock that Rwanda beat the West Indies women's under-19 side? Yes, but only if you think that the name West Indies holds any level of prestige. If you're looking at it in the context of development of the West Indies women's under-19 game, then yeah, I'll take it as an upset of sorts, but is it really? Is our status, is our development as a women's under-19 side really that much further ahead than teams who are deemed associate sides? And particularly in the fact, no, let's not even talk about formats of cricket, just leave it at that. Are we that much further ahead when it comes to development of the women's under-19s game as compared to what might be going on in Rwanda? We probably are ahead, but is it significant ahead? No. And for anybody who's balking at me saying that, tell me now, write down now, what development do we have? Write down now. What infrastructure and what development do we have for the West Indies women's under-19 game prior to this World Cup? The West Indies, if you've not watched my previous video that I did on the tournament and from the West Indies perspective prior to the tournament starting, I clearly said in that video, given this team has really and truly, West Indies under-19 women's side, has really and truly only come together in the last 6 months. This was a side that went to the United States, also an associate side, and lost 4-1 in a 5-match series only 6 months ago. We went out to India, lost to India, got smashed by India A, got smashed by India B, lost badly to Sri Lanka, lost twice to New Zealand, right? This West Indies under-19 women's team has literally only come together in the last 6 months to learn as they go along. So call it an upset if you must, but recognize that the upset that you're describing is only because you are giving weight and prestige to the West Indies name. And for those of you still listening, guy, now, Mash, you talk a bag of fart. You don't know what you're talking about. Let's compare what Rwanda women did in this tournament thus far, right? Because I think this is quite instructive. Prior to the tournament starting, Rwanda played 2 warm-up games. They had a warm-up game against New Zealand women, the same team, the New Zealand women that was in our group. New Zealand women beat them by 63 runs, but check this out. So New Zealand women made 154 for 7 in their 20 overs, and Rwanda women made 91 for 9. I hasten to add that New Zealand women were in West Indies Group C to get into the Super 6 stage, right? In that Group C game, West Indies women were bowled out for 68. New Zealand women chased that down in 7 overs and lost no wickets. Now, that's just one game. And some of you will say, Mash, no, but you can't really make that comparison. Okay. Rwanda's second warm-up game, they played Island women and they beat them by 1 run. Island women were in West Indies group. We beat them by 8 runs. You follow him? In Rwanda's Group B, which they got out of to qualify for this Super 6 stage, they made 106 for 8 against Pakistan women. Pakistan women chased that down in 18 overs. Rwanda women then beat Zimbabwe women by 39 runs. So again, if we're using this full member context, they beat Zimbabwe, who, if we're going to try and say that there's any kind of weight to being a full member, they'd already not beaten one full member prior to playing West Indies. And again, I have to ask people, where do you put West Indies women in their stage of development as compared to Zimbabwe and Rwanda? It can't be significantly that higher, given that when we played the United States, who are also seen as an associate side, they beat us 4-1. This is 6 months ago. After Zimbabwe, Rwanda women got absolutely destroyed by England, which is understandable. England are effectively the strongest team. Then, in Rwanda Women's first Group 6 game, they played New Zealand Women again. Now, remember, I just told you that when we played New Zealand Women in Group C, we made 68 runs all out. New Zealand chased that in 7 overs for the loss of no wickets. Rwanda Women played New Zealand Women a couple of days ago in the Super Sixes. Rwanda made 96 for 7. New Zealand won by 4 wickets. So they chased down the 97 needed, but lost 6 wickets in the process. Are you not starting to understand now? Are you understanding that Rwanda Women ran New Zealand closer twice, both in the warm-up game and in the Super 6 stage game? They gave them far more of a contest than we were able to in our group game against New Zealand Women by a long, long way. So when I saw that now, and we're playing Rwanda Women, in my head, ahead of the game being played, I was like, this is going to be tight. This is going to be tight. This ain't we're going to beat Rwanda Women just because we're West Indies. I saw this for what it was. When you consider the relative development and quality of the two sides, this wasn't full member, historical, big name West Indies playing little associate side Rwanda. As far as I was concerned, this was roughly speaking two equal sides. And depending on who performed best on the day, would probably win, as opposed to could West Indies on women's under-19s afford to drop their levels? Not at all. And that's why I think I was so perturbed by everybody going with the lazy headline of big upset. No, it's not. No, it's not. At best, I'll call it a surprise defeat, but it's not an upset. It's not an upset. So I guess what I'm saying is to all of you lazy kind of cricket writers, cricket followers, cricket fans, whatever it might be, get the West Indies name out of your head. If we weren't called West Indies, would you have seen that as a shock based on the developmental structures of the two sides and the quality of the two sides? Would you have seen that as a shock? You've been blinded by the fact that our name is West Indies to describe it the way you've described it. All that said, putting that all now to one side, was the performance by the West Indies women's under-19 side poor? Yes, of course it was. But my biggest issue, and Ashmini, the captain, Munisar, said it in the post-match kind of interview. My issue, and I saw it in the games against Ireland and Indonesia, much less New Zealand, our ground fielding and catching is just not good enough. But hear me out, people. That's not me digging out the side, because I'd said before this tournament started, this is a developmental tournament for this young side. It's a developmental competition. There's going to be some good moments, and there's probably going to be some very bad moments. We've had 2 good ones, beating Ireland and Indonesia, and we've had 2 bad defeats, getting pummeled by New Zealand, and then having a bit of a surprise, not shock, surprise defeat by Rwanda. But that's what happens when you're a young side with little by the way of real kind of long-term preparation. And this is what happens. So people in the Caribbean in particular, those who consider themselves diehard West Indies fans, don't beat them up now. Don't look at the West Indies women on the 19 side and fall into the lazy trap of going, you see West Indies cricket, this is the latest embarrassment. Here's a question you ask yourself. I always say this. What is your cricket nation? Sorry, what is your National Cricket Association doing for West Indies women's under-19s development? What are they doing? Write into your local newspaper and ask and openly say in your local newspaper, what is our cricket board doing to develop women's cricket? I can tell you what Cricket West Indies are doing, because we asked Johnny Grave this exact question no less than 2-3 days ago. After this tournament is over, the very best of these players alongside the best of the players from this particular World Cup, plus any who shine in our kind of domestic 50 over and T20 competitions in the women's game, will then be part of the West Indies girls or women's I think they're going to call it under 23 academy, where they will get professional facilities where they will get professional focused development, much like the young men have been getting, because obviously they started last year in the West Indies under 23s, if you want to call it that, men's academy. And we've already seen some of that bear fruit with the academy, I think, beating Jamaica in the Super 50. Okay, so we're starting to see that bear fruit in terms of helping the younger players' development, helping them bridge the gap between under 19 stage to senior stage, where we don't have to rely on the development, or more importantly, the lack thereof within each territory, where we don't have to basically be at the beck and call of a territory's inability or inability to do anything for their young players, and in this particular video for their women's players, or young women's players. So yeah, well, did we expect to lose to Rwanda? I don't know, really. I thought it was a 50-50 game. Should we be surprised that they lost? To an extent. Was it an upset? No. All this team can do now is take the lessons away from this World Cup. All Cricket West Indies can do, and in fairness, what the territory should be doing as well, is saying, so now what? When we've got our key learnings from this tournament, what's the next stage? We know that there's going to be a Cricket West Indies academy for the women, for the under 23 women's, but each territory should also be thinking, what are we doing? How are we going to help develop our younger players for when the women's domestic championship starts, both the 50 over and the T20? What are Trinidad going to be doing? What are Jamaica going to be doing? What are the Leewards doing? What are the Windwards doing? What are Barbados doing? What are Guyana doing? So don't just say this is the death of West Indies cricket. Put it back on the territories and see and ask, what are they now doing to prep their young ladies when they come back from this World Cup to help them develop their game? Or do we just write them all off and say, well, boy, they're all a rucks. They don't know how to develop anything in the territories. And we therefore have to look at the Cricket West Indies Academy in Antigua and say, well, boy, they're going to take the best 15 young ladies in the region, and hopefully that developmental structure within the West Indies Academy for the women will help bridge the pathway for them into the senior side, who, let's be honest, the senior women's side are also in a stage of flux. Listen, a lot to discuss there, people. If you've listened to this podcast episode on a podcast platform, as ever, you can at us at Carib Cricket on Twitter and Instagram. That's where you can find us. We're also on Facebook. Just search Caribbean Cricket Podcast. It's a private group, so I'll have to let you in, but I basically let everyone in. But most importantly of all, as I said at the top of the video, like, share, subscribe if you're on YouTube, if you're watching this on YouTube, to the Caribbean Cricket Podcast. And lastly, I didn't say at the top of the show, but if you do want to support the Caribbean Cricket Podcast, head to www.patreon.com/Carib Cricket. And for as little as £2, $2, to yen, to rupee, to euros, to Jamaican dollars, whatever your currency is, you can become a supporter of what we do at the Caribbean Cricket Podcast and help us keep going. Thank you for listening to that video. That hopefully has given you some food for thought, people. What do you think? Am I talking a bag of fart? Should I be upset? Should I be shocked? Was it a big upset? Is it an indictment of Cricket West Indies and West Indies cricket that we lost to Rwanda? Or are you a pragmatist like me, and it just is what it is, and it's just another step in the development of a very young, inexperienced side? Let me know your thoughts, people. Thank you, and good night.
We rule the cricket world. Now the rules.
Welcome to the Caribbean Cricket Podcast, your one-stop shop for all things West Indies cricket. By the fans, for the fans.